Okay, brilliant. Right. Okay, so I'm going to just read. It'll be a bit boring, but here we go.
Cheers,
I'm
Hannah.
assuming, thanks. I'm assuming a basic knowledge of LPS is understood by people here. So rather than trying to explain the intricacies of the H2 joint, I'm aiming to give the subject some context and bring to light evidence relating to the structural deficiencies of all LPS, high and low rise, which until now have not been published. There are many BRE booklets and industry guidelines out there which I have tried to look beyond in order to establish the reality from the theory. I understand the common defects of LPS mentioned here align with those included in the HRB compendium, which is great.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being here,
Yes.
giving your valuable time.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay, cheers.
Okay, so this is a random selection of articles that were printed between 1960 and 1970 in the Evening Standard, and one of them is from the Islington Gazette. And they are, I'll read the headlines because they tell a story in themselves. Are we building the slums of tomorrow? Halfway to Councilville. Our GLC houses are goodbye. As these old houses come down, up goes Goldfinger's street in the sky. On the nod, at evening in the council chamber, the Essex Alcatraz. What we need, they said, is a garden city with tree-lined streets. What they got is this, and there's a photo of a terrible estate in Tower Hamlets. Labour kicks out Brack. This, with a photo, into this, with a photo. Was it worth all the fuss? That was about the Packington estate, which is well documented. The lessons of Ronan Point, an expensive mistake, but who will pay? At stake, the safety of 100,000 people. The plans that gathered dust for 3 ominous years. The continuing scandal of Ronan Point. My late father was called Harry Brack. He wrote all those headlines and accompanying articles criticising the then housing policy of demolish and redevelop using industrialised building methods, as opposed to the much cheaper rehabilitation programme of existing, mostly Victorian, terraced housing stock. A quantity surveyor and Islington councillor, his freelance journalism landed him in a lot of hot water, as in 1964, he was kicked out of the Islington Council and the Labour Party nationally for the article, Are We Building the Slums of Tomorrow? Writing again in 1968, after the Ronan Point disaster had killed 5 people, he was in trouble again. And now we have a next slide, which was 2 letters which were sent to me by someone called Holly Smith, who was doing a PhD on the collapse at Ronan Point. And I didn't look for these letters. They were handed today. She emailed them to me as part of her, she was asking questions for her PhD. So I'll read one of them. Calumnies against the ministry. This is to R. Brain, Esquire CB, at the Ministry of Housing and Local Government on the 26th of September 1968. Dear Brain, I reported our discussion of Tuesday about the Evening Standard's article on the 23rd of September to the chairman, who has instructed our solicitors to send the enclosed holding letter both to Mr. Brack, the contributor, and to the editor. Our solicitors have taken counsel's opinion and appear to have no doubt that from a legal point of view it would be extremely unwise to leave this matter over, and they recommended holding action in terms of the enclosed. Letter 2. Dear Brain, this is in October, Ronan Point, Evening Standard article. I have your note and will keep in touch with you after the report. Meanwhile, you will be interested to know that the persons reported by the journalist concerned, in quotes, to have uttered calumnies against the ministry and the NBA, have each stated that they were completely misquoted and that they have written to the editor to this effect, disassociating themselves from the contents of the article. The NFBTE, on behalf of the Federation and Bill Bryant, the officer quoted, have also tendered sincere apologies to the agency. One of those quoted has also provided evidence of malice aforethought in respect of the Evening Standard contributor. However, I will keep in touch with you before we take any further action. They tried to fit him up and say what he was reporting in the article wasn't true. Well, it was true. It was all true, and he's been proved right time and time again. So, the players. Sir Keith Joseph and Sir Richard Crossman, industrial building drives. In 1958, Sir Keith Joseph, whose family was Bovis Construction, came up with this idea, which was in theory a really good idea, to solve the housing crisis in the post-war era. And it was to build them cheap, high and quick. And that was basically the industrial building drive. And another element to the intention was to get rid of the need for what's called wet trades, you know, bricklayers, plasterers and the like. And so it would, economically on paper, it looked like a very good idea. Sam Webb, MBE, who probably the world's only expert to his level on LPS, I worked with very closely for 5 years investigating the National Archive files, and he sent me an awful lot of documentation that he had from when he'd investigated the collapse at Ronan Point in 1986, and also he'd seen the original inquiry reports at the time of the inquiry. So he sent me this. It's a secret cabinet paper from the 1st of October 1962, and it's quite long, but the highlighted piece is on page 2, paragraph 10. And it says, the highlighted section that Sam highlighted was, this is Keith Joseph, we must make more use of industrial techniques. Various methods are being developed here and in Europe, which speed erection and reduce demands on building labour. These relate mainly to the building of high-rise blocks, though experiments are also being made in the simplification of house building. In collaboration with the Ministry of Public Building and Works, I shall foster these experiments and secure the large-scale adoption of the most successful systems. So he was driving this, and there were circulars sent out, industrial building drive, by him at the time, which I won't include here because you can find them. Yeah, okay, so then what happens is Labour then win the election. So our friend here, Sir Richard Crossman, takes the helm. They promised in their manifesto the same housing targets, and so they adopted this industrial building drive wholeheartedly. They built upon it, expanded upon it, and implemented it across the country, Northern Ireland, Wales, everywhere. Scotland was a bit different because they have their own housing, system, divisions, but pretty parallel. Then we get another circular, 1965, industrial building drive. And this is someone called D.C. Milifanti, who I think must have been a civil servant. But the things that come out of that are that the local authorities are being forced to use this way of building, the industrial building systems. And it's circular number 7665, announces the industrialized building drive. This is aimed at a rapid expansion of industrialized house building used in the most economical manner and giving local authorities the best value for money. Well, I think they differ with that now. 60 years later, it's been extremely costly exercise all round that people have been paying for in their council tax for 50 years, At the present time, because of programme uncertainties and other causes, industrialized building sponsors have spare capacity and an urgent need for further orders. It is vitally important to ensure that this spare capacity is committed as quickly as possible and that local authority IB schemes, which are now at various stages of preparation, should be got quickly to the point where contracts can be made. So they were pushing this hard and fast, because they'd set up factories to make these precast panel units, and they were invested heavily, these contractors, and they called them sponsors of the systems, and there were many systems. I won't go on this, but it's a drive, another industrial building drive, basically coming from central government. So then we have a visual now. This is a photograph taken by the London Fire Brigade. And you can see the anecdote here. It says it was taken on the 16th of May, 1968, which is the day of the disaster. This photograph was taken from the entrance hall. So you're inside Ronan Point looking out at the site office, and I've enlarged the section which says safety comes first. And that was a sort of sign outside their offices. And I thought it was quite ironic. And this is what it all came to, all their building drives and everything. This is what happened. So the LPS, the experiment that went wrong. The National Building Agency was set up as an advisory body specifically to monitor, control and issue licenses for the systems which were now coming into play. So they set up a classification of the systems. They did all sorts of work commissioned by the sponsors, so the contractors. An important one is the Kidderminster Special Investigation, which includes a report of structural reports that were carried out at Rugby on blocks that were in the middle of construction, because the Kidderminster blocks were already inhabited. I think they were the first ever bison blocks built. And there were complaints, you know, residents were struggling with sound, insulation and damp and all kind of problems. And they were actually involved with the litigation from Brighton and Hove Council, who were suing Bison, who were Concrete Limited, Concrete Southern, Concrete Northern, Concrete Scotland, called ScotCon, which again I find quite ironic. And they commissioned the NBA, which is BRS by then, I think it was a BRS, to do a special report. And what they wanted was a sort of favourable report that they could rely on for their evidence in court. But what happened was the Rugby report, which we'll come to in a minute, was not favourable at all and was quite damning, actually. And so in the special investigation report that's on the file, sorry, excuse me, you can't find the Rugby report anywhere. It's not filed. It's not an appendix on the report. You know, it's like a mystifying thing. If you're looking for the structural element of the special investigation, it's just not there. And it took me a couple of years to actually find it, but we found it. And it's very small. It's only a 2-page memo. And so I'll come to that later. Sorry, I've lost my thread a bit. But here is the AMA Defects in Housing Part 2, July 1983. There were so many problems across all the authorities and up and down the country that the Association of Metropolitan Authorities tried to pull all the information together and do a comprehensive report on the common defects. And this is what they came up with. They start off by introducing the report by saying, in our earlier publication, we referred to the difficulty of collating details of the types of non-traditional dwellings and qualifying their associated defects. While the 1960s and 70s dwellings are 20 years younger, the same difficulties apply. There are a few publications which attempt to identify the types, and official statistics are limited. There has been virtually no attempt to record the associated defects in any systematic way, and we have therefore had to rely upon research from member authorities and limited publication material. Our information cannot ever be fully comprehensive, but does represent the experience of most of metropolitan districts at least. Even so, difficulties in identification of the many systems and the recording of defects associated with each type means that it is no easy task for authorities to be entirely clear about the exact nature of their own problems. We would hope, however, that the information presented here is taken as a broad expression of the size and nature of the problem and is probably the best estimate yet available. We must, however, reiterate our view from our previous work that a fuller investigation is needed and that this can only be undertaken by central government. Well, you know, we're doing a audit now, but it's 60 years, you know, 60 years too late, really. They knew about all these problems in 1964. They knew about them again in 1983. They knew about them again in 1986 when Sam did a forensic demolition of Ronan Point. But yet here we still are talking about LPS and the lack of information and the difficulty of assessing blocks. So, you know, really, it's a bit much, really. high-rise systems. I won't go on. It's all, the defects. What are the defects? Cracking of the decorative panels, water ingress, corrosion of reinforcements, differential movement also occurs in parapet walls. Condensation, major difficulty. Condensation also been reported as cause of electrical failure and deterioration of insulation boards and surface finishes. Roofs, flat roofs, always a problem. Drains, always a problem. Sound insulation, spalling concrete. Localized damage is itself expensive and difficult to treat. Calcium chloride was also used in precast units. Asbestos products are not confined to industrial building systems. Nevertheless, they are far more prevalent. It just goes on and on. The association has found that most of the problems of asbestos in housing, which members now face, are indeed concentrated on the post-war non-traditional and industrialized stock. External staircases, asphalt coverings, drainage problems I've mentioned. So precast concrete systems, they go in more detail. Insufficient ties between inner and outer leaves, external walls, panels, water penetration, it's cold bridging, the whole thing. You've got all that in your compendium, so I won't go on. There's pages of it here. Okay, so the next slide, where are we? Yeah, we've just covered this. AMA defects in housing, extract. Common defects we've mentioned, system built high-rise common defects. And here is the link. I can forward this link. This is the only publication I could find of the AMA report, but it's there. So then we move on to the classification of systems, 1968. A lot of the work I did with Sam was to actually compile an Excel spreadsheet of existing large panel system blocks up and down the country, which was an incredibly difficult task. And the reason I did this was because one of the articles my father wrote, I think it's The Continuing Scandal of Ronan Point, he goes and he interviews the NBA and the ministry, and he can't believe they don't have a record of where these blocks are. And they've always relied on the fact of plausible deniability, where they say, well, it's fine because we can bring the information in from the local authorities whenever we need it. Well, guess what? When they needed it, the local authorities, a lot of them never sent returns, like Birmingham, who had a huge number of bison blocks and still have got blocks with gas. They've got blocks that then saying are not large panels, but they are large panel system, like Waits, they've said are not large panel, but in the classification, if you go into the National Archive files, which is what I did, you find Waits there, and they created their own kind of system. And this is a major problem with identification, is that contractors, say Tersons, they may not have always used a large panel system. They may have been creating housing buildings before, pre-1958. So it doesn't mean that everything built by Tersons is a large panel system. However, they did adopt a large panel system later on. So blocks built by them in 1968 have got large panel elements, so it's a very tricky thing to do. So I went back to the archive files, and here I'll just enlarge this a little bit because it's quite an important document. This is 1968 December, so they realized they were out of their depth. Ronan Point had collapsed on the southeast corner, people had died, questions were being asked, and now the NBA, which had become the BRS, had to take control and tell the local authorities what they had in terms of whether the systems were large panel systems or not. And this is how they classified all the different building methods. And so what you find is the large panel systems are actually classified as a number 3 or a number 4, and also number 10. And you can see there 3. They called it a heavy panel factory made, or a heavy panel made on site, and in situ concrete poured on site. So this is a very important document, which I don't think anyone's ever seen before. And then within this, it goes on and they list, there's 30 pages of this. They list, it's very bad quality. I'm sorry about that. But I took photographs of all these pages because there was hundreds and hundreds of pages per file, and we couldn't really afford to pay the £1 per page for a copy. So I photographed every page. In here, you can see they've got their classification. They've got the, say, NFC, I'm not sure what that is. Number 3, so that's the heavy panel made on site, I think. Concrete, and it's got a timber thing. Some of them are for low rise, some of them are for housing, but also the high rise is also included in here. So if we go on to another sheet, we've got TWA for weights is here. Look. We've got weights here. I don't know if I can highlight it. And it's a number 4. So without a doubt, they were considering it to be a large panel system, heavy panel, made either on site or in factory. And then again, they do another chart with the category. So whether it's a 3, a 4, or a 10, then the system, the main structural material, party wall, all that kind of thing. Again, another kind of 100 pages of the stuff. And here we have bison wall frame. Don't know if you can see, it's got a number 3. Precast panels, precast concrete panels, various claddings, concrete limited, concrete, bison wall frame. And they called it wall frame, but there's no frame. So again, what was going on? I don't know. So I had to go through all the information that I had. I should add that I was very, very fortunate, because trying to find lists of these blocks is impossible, as you will know. When the terrible disaster at Grenfell Tower happened, that actually happened on the day of my dad's birthday, and I was living in Holland, and I used to celebrate my dad's birthday rather than remember his passing. And so for me, it was like a lightning bolt of, oh my God, you know, it's not just the cladding, it's the large panel system blocks as well, because I was waiting for the whole thing to collapse. I didn't realize it was built in 1972, so it was after the change in the building regulations had really kicked in, that came in 1970. But you know, it was what I remembered, it was that in the article, when he went to see the ministry and talked to Dr. Chan at the NBA, that they had no list, and that there was no central body monitoring what was going on with these blocks. They had gone up so rapidly, and at the demands of the central government, that the local authorities had kind of lost control of it, really. And after the Grenfell Tower disaster, Sam told me that he'd helped somebody called Golding on the formulation of a database for a sort of architectural artistic brutalist, in praise of brutalist architecture in Edinburgh University. But then they'd had some kind of thing where the information Sam had given him, he didn't credit him, and so there was a bit of a fallout. But anyway, I phoned up the Edinburgh project and I said, we need your data, because I do master data, it's something that I'm familiar with. And they said, no, we're not giving it out. Everybody wants our data. The Economist wants our data. All these publications have been phoning, because people were trying to calculate, you know, the potential financial implications of blocks that were defective, not just cladding, you know, going a bit deeper into it. So for ages, I told Sam, he said, just keep trying. And so I did. And eventually I got through to a lovely lady called Hannah Brack. And she said, I said, look, we're acting on behalf of the residents and tenants and leaseholders of these places, and it's your moral duty to give me the list of what you've got, because they had, from the local authorities at one point, they had a really comprehensive list of the blocks that had been built, and there was about 7,000, of which about 4,000 had already been demolished. So it made my task a little easier. She sent me what's called a CSV file with everything on there, but it didn't list block names. Mostly it listed the site development areas with sometimes always, I think, the contractor, sometimes the architect, and very sometimes, but quite rarely, what system it was used. So I was able to then compare the contractors from the BRE categorization lists that I'm just showing you now with the what system they were using, you know. So contractor, say you've got Concrete Limited, they're using the bison wall frame system. that's categorized as a number 3. And so you can start to build up the picture if you pull it all together, but it's not complete. It's not an exact science. You know, I have many blocks that I just don't know what they are. For instance, the one in Bristol, I can't remember something how, there was one recently in Bristol and it's escaped me the name at the moment.
Barton House?
Yeah, that Barton House. I didn't have as LPS. I had it as a don't know, or could be, or I even had it as pre-system because I thought, well, it was built 1958 or 60. It was very early. So I thought it was a different sort of build. I didn't know that actually it's been now considered as LPS or having LPS elements. Another one is in Enfield at the moment in Edmonton, Walbrook House. I had that as a don't know, but that is LPS and everyone's been evacuated, you know. And so I've been very conservative with my list. I've only included things that I'm absolutely sure about. So they're listed as bison, you know, they're somewhere else, not just me, is able to say what they are. Those are listed as confirmed LPS. And then I have a section of suspected, which are built by the same contractor at the same time, even in the same area. I have those as suspected because I need somebody else. Well, you know, the industry needs somebody else like yourselves to go in and confirm it, you know, open up the joints and see, well, okay, it's LPS. The other big problem is the cladding, you know, because they had so many problems with water ingress and damp. Cladding was actually a good way of sorting this out. So not all blocks have got ACM, but a lot of them have got high pressure laminate, which is what Lakenhall House had. So you have a block in Islington, 4 blocks, for instance, that are high pressure laminate. They've got rock wool insulation, which is great, but if the fire was to spread externally, you know, it would take a hold. And these things are not being considered. They were only considered, well, it's not ACM, so it's all fine. You know, we'll come on to the harvest estate later, but I'll move on because I'm dwelling a bit on this. Okay, so this is this special investigation. This is what I was telling you about. Bison commissioned BRS to do a special investigation into Kidderminster, and this element of it is quite important because I searched high and low. Sam said to me, find the special investigation into Kidderminster. There's an important report in there, structural report, that no one's been able to find in 50 years or 60 years now. And I read the report, and I was looking for the structural elements, and all you get is a paragraph 8, acceptability of tenants of the ventilated access areas. Hidden in there, it says the last of the 3 blocks of flats concerned had been finished and tenanted before this investigation was begun. But visits by the Building Research Station officers to the factory of Concrete Midlands Limited at Lichfield where all the wall frame components for Kidderminster had been made, enabled the manufacturing process to be studied and the design concepts discussed. The methods of erecting and connecting wall frame components were observed on building sites in Birmingham and Rugby. With the cooperation of the Kidderminster Borough Engineer, his architectural assistant and the flat superintendent, the Hercott Road blocks were visited by BRS officers on the 9th, 10th of March, blah, blah. But the most important thing is that they went and they did structural reports in Birmingham and Rugby. Well, we've never found the Birmingham report. Birmingham are the most cagey of all the authorities when it comes to this. Anyway, we found the Rugby report after much, much terribleness is all I can say. Right. Okay. Where is it? Here it is. Sorry, I've just thrown it away. Okay, so here we go. This is the Rugby report. 2 pages only, so I'm going to read it. It's a bit painful, but I'm going to. It says, I inspected on Friday, February the 28th, a site at Rugby where Concrete Limited are erecting their multi-storey precast wall and floor panel buildings forming part of a local authority housing scheme. Later, I called at the design office and precasting works of the same company at Lichfield. At Rugby, I was shown round by Mr. Sullivan, Sullivan, the site engineer, and also talked to Mr. Smith, as his assistant, who are employed as clerks of works by Bryanstons, the company engaged to carry out building and finishing operations after Concrete Limited completed the erection of their structure. At Lichfield, I was accompanied by Mr. Hall, the head of the design DO, Mr. Birtles, the managing director, being absent. I have the following comments to make. 1. The relatively large number of defective panels underlined in the structure is surprising. In one floor alone, there were 4 or 5 inadequate joints between panels as a result of misplaced steel loops or missing locating bars, these joints being parallel to the end walls. 2. I was given several explanations of what is done in these cases. A hole 12 inches deep is drilled in the top of the wall slab with a diamond tip tool, and a locating pin is grouted into the hole. B, a hole 6 inches deep is drilled and treated as fray. C, a short length of bar is placed in the joint to link the loops, but this bar is not grouted into the wall slab and no hole is drilled. A short reinforcing bar is placed in that joint, which lies nearest to the missing locating pin, perpendicularly to the joint, which is defective. You see, they had these looping mechanisms that looped in. They were protruding loops from the bottom of the panels on the wall panel, the floor panel. They went out and they were supposed to loop and then put a bar through. Well, I'll just carry on reading this really. He says, the joints which are defective. I have not seen any of these remedial measures actually put into operation. So this was just them saying, yeah, well, when there's a loop missing, this is what we do, and we put another bar, but they never actually did it. They just told him that that was what the procedure was. 3, similar remedial measures are said to have been used where the loops were missing or happened to have been badly located. Where the loops were damaged, corresponding loops were cut and welded to each other, but this practice has now been discontinued. Sam said that when he went to a site, he saw them smashing the loops off with a sledgehammer that wouldn't fit when they were putting the panel down. I mean, you imagine you've got this however many 3-ton panel coming down at you and you're 20, 30 feet up. You know, you don't want to mess around. You're on top of a ladder trying to locate it, fit everything properly, you know. Oh dear. Anyway, 4, the assembly of the outer walls is based on vertical threaded locating pins protruding from the top of successive wall panels into holes cored in the base of the wall panel above. Nuts placed on the pin being used to support the latter and to ensure correct positioning in relation to each other. When the top panel is in its correct position, concrete is placed below its base, and when hardened, it is assumed to provide adequate bedding to transmit the self-weight in the case of the longitudinal walls, and self-weight as well as vertical live loading in the case of the end walls. No provision is made, however, for setting the nuts back after hardening of the concrete in the joints. It seems, therefore, that the bedding function of this concrete cannot be fulfilled adequately owing to shrinkage, and that the load of successive slabs is in fact transmitted through the nuts and locating bolts. In multi-story structures, this will lead to stress concentrations in the concrete near the bolts, which can cause unsightly fractures and reduce the durability and even the stability of the structure. We'll come to those lifting bolts later on, locator bolts. Anyway, 5, the floor slabs are initially located on the internal load-bearing wall panels by means of steel shims placed at the corners of the floor slabs. Dry packed concrete is then inserted to bed the latter. Owing to shrinkage, however, this bedding cannot be effective. Latterly, hardboard pieces have been used in place of steel shims. This method seems preferable. 6, the structural concept of the blocks at Rugby should be looked at. I mean, you know, the structural concept of the blocks at Rugby should be looked at. This is in 1964. Essentially, it consists of 3 adjacent vertical slab blocks, interconnected at every floor by means of a 7/8 of an inch diameter bar placed in the transverse joints of alternate or every third floor slab, and at the end walls. These are ordinarily mild steel bars 15 foot long and lapped. 7. The site organisation seems competent, but the operating techniques of the gangs seem inexpert. The numbers excessive and teamwork and esprit de corps non-existent. This is not the sort of job that can be done satisfactorily, safely and economically with what appeared to me to be an odd assortment of locally recruited, inadequately trained labourers. You know, they used to go in the morning with a van and pick up navvies off the corner of the street, you know, cash work. Anyway, 8. The casting work is being extended and work suffered accordingly. Many of the defects in the slabs found at the site were obviously the result of inadequate supervision at the works. This is not to say that the latter is worse than other similar undertakings up and down the country. It does mean, however, that it is not adequate for the job it is intended to do. This refers particularly to the control of the placing of reinforcements. There is no regular approval by a supervisor of the reinforcement being cast before casting can commence. The phosphor bronze connectors placed at the middle of the external sandwich slabs to connect the two concrete units may be the cause of corrosion as a result of electrolytic action if in contact with the steel reinforcements in the presence of moisture. This should be looked at. Well, I think they changed that. I think that was a very early on defect. And I've read somewhere that they stopped using the bronze, the copper. Anyway, that's the elusive rugby report that's never been published. You know, the BRS wanted to send it out to all the local authorities to warn them, but because the matter was considered sub judice by Concrete Limited, and because the rugby report and this elusive Birmingham one that we've never seen were used as the structural elements for the special investigation into Kidderminster, which Concrete had been paying for and had commissioned, they said, no, you're not allowed to publish it. And this letter explains that, because the Scottish Housing Division had got hold of it somehow. And it says, "Dear Mr. Alsop, I enclose a copy of the letter which was sent out by the Scottish Development Department on the 23rd of April, la la la. I thank you for your assurance that you will see that this sort of disclosure is not repeated without consultation with us." So they put a lid on it. And because the BRS was being paid, a lot like the BRE gets paid, you know, it flavours what comes out. So okay, so now we move on to Ronan Point. When Sam investigated Ronan Point, you know, it took a huge part of his life. It was a chunk of work. When he first looked at the files and he went to the ministry, they still had them all there during the time of the inquiry. He went through them page by page, you know, thousands of documents. And then when he recalled the files later on in 1986, he said that half of the stuff was missing, but he'd already got information, you know. So these notes is some that he sent me, and they're from the actual inquiry submissions. Okay, so this is really important because this has not been published either. He says this report was made by the National Building Agency 2 days after the partial collapse of Ronan Point, and that's Sam Webb, 15th of 11th, 2015. And the main piece that I found as well was the thing about the walls, and this is what it says. Structural aspect of the collapse. Walls. Although the intensity of pressure developed by the explosion cannot be readily established, it is possible to estimate pressure under which each element of the flat in question would fail structurally, and thus to identify the element which would fail at the least pressure. An assessment with this procedure points to the gable load bearing wall being the most likely to have failed first at an internal pressure of the order of 200 pounds per square foot or 1.4 pounds per square inch. Now this blows all the recommendations apart, because when they realised that, they knew that none of the blocks would ever meet the 5 pounds per square inch required to withstand an explosion, what they estimated would exist. And so they were in trouble, you know, because if the gable wall had failed first at 1.4, it makes a nonsense of all the recommendations that followed. But they obviously had to issue recommendations which followed, because otherwise, you know, what are you going to do? People were living in these flats already. Also, just as a note, later on, there's another thing that Sam sent me that I can't find at the moment, but it says there was a full-scale, you know, like an 8414 test, a full-scale test rig on the bison joints, and that failed at 1.8. So that's another clarification, you know, that this 2.5 and the 5 psi for gas or without gas, it's a bit of a fiction. Anyway, we'll move on. Strengthening appraisals. They carried out appraisals for local authorities who were tasked with fixing their blocks, basically. And the government was often offering a 40% subsidy to pay for the remedial works. Well, councils up and down the country said, you forced us to build like this. Now it's gone wrong. You can pay for the remedies, you know. 40% is not going to cover it. And authorities like Liverpool, who are on record, said that they would do the 40% of the work, but when the money ran out, they wouldn't do any more. In fact, they even said, we're not even going to do the work, we'll take the 40%, but beyond that, we're making no promises, because people felt, you know, they felt betrayed by the government who had forced them to build like this. So if we look at a golden thread, for example, I see you've published a document on golden thread, but I haven't looked at it. But from a non-technical point of view, so not including design specifications, drawings, details of the joints, which I've got details of all the joints from the different predominant systems that I'll send to you because they're quite important. They had to present their case to the BRS, who were assessing, that's pretty much what's going on now, remedial works. Well, let's look at an example, the Harvest Estate in Islington. This is what the BRS had to say about the proposed work to be carried out by Islington at the Harvest Estate. And what they say is 4.1. The chairman said that this was a situation in which the council was still trying to retain gas, i.e. they'd have to meet 5 psi. Dr. Chan stressed that the committee were dealing with a different office of ZINS. ZINS were the consultants for Islington Council. Of ZINS had from the Windmill Lane, which was a separate development. The plan form was also different. ZINS had propounded the novel idea of resisting 5 psi by fixing strengthening bars to the walls with Certite epoxy resin. As far as the gable wall was concerned, he would not accept ZINS' case as to the floor remaining, and thought that the columns must be braced with internal support. Mr. Creasy said that there must be support in 2 directions, and Dr. Chan agreed. Stiffening of internal cross walls where alternative paths of support were not available by fixing steel plates using a resin adhesive was then considered. Mr. Harris said that these proposals would give only strength, not stiffness. The slab itself was plain concrete, not reinforced, and would not stand up to an explosion. There was added strength, but the mode of failure would not be modified. Events would not occur as ZINS conceived. The chairman said that the thinking behind this solution seemed to be that part of the panel could remain and provide some bridging, as with Concrete Limited's case. Mr. Harris said that it was vital that Certite be mixed correctly. There were 3 difficulties, viz. 1, correct mixing was extremely difficult under normal site conditions. 2, Certite was difficult to apply properly. And 3, There had to be scrupulous cleanliness in relation to grease and dust. There were very considerable problems as to grease on steel and dust on concrete. There was the point, however, that if additional bolting were considered, there would be a clamping pressure, and the resin could stop bolts from slipping. After further discussion, it was agreed that the problems of using Certite were extremely serious, and the use of this material did not seem to represent a very promising technical solution. Mr. Whitefield Lewis suggested that a simple solution such as a pair of channels back to back and bolted together through the wall might be acceptable. Well, what happens then is that Zinn, these consulting engineers, they said, all right, well, we'll take the gas out. So we've only got to meet 2.5. And then I think they went ahead with the Certite because there's no other records of what they did. And, you know, it is what it is. So then roll forward 50 years and you get the Conisbee consultants. I think this is 2019, is it maybe before? And they have gone back through their records, and this is what they have. They have a very different take on it. You know, it's just amazing, really. So they quote Zinn in their appraisal for Islington Council about the Harvest Estate 3.1.1. The 4 blocks on the Harvest Estate were built circa 1965, so before the Ronan Point partial collapse. Each block contains 109 dwellings. The LPS used was bison wall frame, which was the most common form of LPS. In response to the MHLG circular, blah, blah. 3.1.2. As a result, the gas supply originally provided when the blocks were built was removed and strengthening brackets were installed with each end flat between the floor and end wall. Zinn's design intent was that the brackets would hold the end wall to the floor and thus prevent it from being displaced. If it had been displaced, blown out in effect, progressive collapse would have been possible. The strengthening meant that the blocks therefore conformed to MHLG 7168, i.e. the blocks would not suffer progressive collapse in the event of an explosion of 2.5 psi ESA. Well, that doesn't make sense because an explosion of 2.5, it's in it, you know, why would you need it to be 5 if the explosion is only going to be 2.5? You know, it just doesn't make any sense. This was the standard for LPS blocks without a gas supply. Well, Sam read the report and was horrified, you know. This is a Martech. This is a Martech report that was, you know, their findings that was included in the Conisbee report, but kind of hidden. And as instructed, we carried out internal investigations relating to the compartmentation of residential flats at Talbot House, Islington. That's part of the Harvest Estate. We also briefly investigated the remedial strengthening brackets to the gable wall panels. All internal investigations were carried out by our engineers. The compartmentation investigations looked at 2 key areas of potential gaps that could allow passage of fire to form flats above or below, to and from flats above or below. These being 1, joints between the edges of the floor slabs and the attached spandrel panel on the main external elevation, and 2, gaps around service pipes rising from the flat below through to the flat above. Well, that's not mentioned. They don't say there's compartmentation issues with the Conisbee report. This is the Martech photos of where they've excavated the joints. And what they're saying is there were brackets missing. Strengthening brackets were seen to have been fitted along the floor to gable wall joint. It was noted that the gable wall within the flat comprised 3 number precast panels. However, the brackets were only installed to 2 of these. The 3rd panel in the kitchen had no strengthening brackets. Well, what are they assuming that those brackets are all good then? I would assume that the brackets are all not good then, because if there's one missing in the flat they did open up, what does it mean about the rest? Anyway, sorry, I'm getting a bit stressed out with this. But anyway, but on behalf of the residents of the Harvest Estate, who I had friends living there at the time, Sam very kindly looked at the Conisbee report, and this was his take on it. I won't read the whole thing, but it's lengthy. And he picks holes in all of it, which I'll send copies of this, no problem, later on. But he goes on. And this is his report. I've pulled out an extract from it. And what he says is, at the end, he says, I have investigated many LPS buildings over a period of 50 years. Nothing anyone says about these buildings being safe can ever be taken at face value. The only way to investigate these buildings is to open up the structure to satisfy what you are being told or shown on drawings is actually present. It should be remembered that the very intricate joints in these buildings were made by unskilled labour working on piecework. As was said during the Ronan Point inquiry by more than one eminent engineer, the fact that a structure is standing up doesn't make it safe. The Morandi Bridge in Genoa is an example of that, as was our own Tay Bridge in 1879. And that's Sam. Well, I mean, look at Argentina this week. Look at the Champagne Towers. You know, it all looks great until it comes down. And that's what we want to try and avoid, right? This is Barry Font. I can never say the name. Barry Fantoni's cartoon from 1984. It's brilliant. You'll be perfectly safe now. We've done a major reconstruction job on the report. Okay, so back to the large panel. This is the construction of Morris Walk series. These were the first Taylor Woodrow Anglian Larson Nielsen large panel system blocks to go up, and it was a massive estate. It's now been demolished, but anyway, this is, you can see quite clearly how they were lifting the panels. The guy up there on the ladder, very high up, trying to, you know, make the panels fit to the locator pins and whatever they were doing. It was all very difficult work, I think. I wouldn't have wanted to do it anyway. That's the construction. And this is the blocks coming down. Taylor Woodrow Anglian Larson Nielsen blocks collapsing on the southeast corner of Ronan Point, which killed 5 people. When they demolished the entire estate in 1986, the demolition crew gave Sam this locator bolt, and you can see it's bent. It was obviously carrying the load, which was stated in 1964 when they didn't, they didn't undo the nuts. It meant when the concrete dried, it dried on the nut was still tight, so it shrank and the weight was going onto these bars. This is a letter because I want to show you the mindset of what was going on. And I've typed it up somewhere. Here we go. This was a massive thing for the government. You know, it was a policy they'd introduced, they'd implemented. It was supposed to be the answer to everybody's problems. And then it all went wrong. So my dad was the victim of them trying to gag people and not have it reported. That the inquiry, if their inquiry had been carried out a repeat today, it would be incredibly different, because there's certain elements to it where the electrical engineer's evidence was not scrutinised. He was just dismissed. There was no questions for him. And there's a whole other seminar I could give about Ronan Point, because it's a whole untold story, the reality. So this is a letter from Anthony Tony Greenwood, who was the housing minister, to Harold Wilson, the prime minister, on the 14th of September 1968. And he says, "My dear Harold, touch wood, but I think the tide has turned on Ronan Point. This was much too difficult a problem to rush into lasting action, but I have carried with me the associations, the system builders, and the Institute of Structural Engineers, who, with some of their members, have behaved magnificently. The criteria have been spread, and some councils are already at work. Moreover, I have gone beyond the tribunal in directing that gas must be cut off even before appraisal. I did 2 useful TV interviews on Ronan Point last night, one ITN or something, the BBC, and the BBC. My only hesitation about also appearing on the Cathy programme was that it was difficult to fit in with the other two, to which I was already committed. But everything was very, and then I can't read it. And the Cathy appearance was, I think, extremely useful. Yours, still touching wood, Tony, right? So they were praying. Not only that, they didn't have one engineer in their department. All this implementation and industrial building drives, and the local authorities must build higher and bigger and la la la. They didn't have an engineer on site, on the side. So when Ronan Point collapsed, that was they noted that. They said this could be an issue. We don't want the press to pick up the fact that we've been advising all these, very skilled, professionals without having the equivalent on board. Sorry, this is the cross report. This is very important, this cross report. I'll read you a very small paragraph at the end. It's cross report 885, disproportionate collapse assessment of large panel system LPS buildings. At the end, he says, the reporter adds that simply because an unsupported technical justification has previously been accepted by approving authorities is no justification for taking the same approach again. Obtaining approvals based on precedent without evidential basis is unbecoming of a chartered structural engineer and should, in the reporter's opinion, be strongly condemned. Well, they came to the same conclusion as Sam had come to. And, what they're saying is you can't do what they did with the Harvest Estate. You can't rely on Zinn from 1964 that was rejected at the time and then say, oh, yeah, it's all tickety-boo. It just doesn't add up. This is a low-rise bison report that Sam sent me, which is also very important. It's quite long, so I haven't included it here. But what Sam says about it is, in an email, he says, Dear both, this is a very important report on low-rise LPS bison. I hadn't read this report for 40 years until yesterday. It's part of a much longer report of at least 77 pages. There's a note on the cover, structural parts only. I'm not sure who wrote that, but I would have been given this by Maurice McCarthy, the Deputy Borough Architect of Hillingdon, and a friend. We were both on REBA Council and were founder members of the Salaried Architects Group, which changed the REBA when we all got elected to the council in 1972-73. The notes inside in fine pen are mine. This is just because I've got the hard copy. The NBA were responsible for low-rise LPS, and you do wonder what they were doing for nearly 20 years, as this report is in 39 pages, comes to the same conclusion that the BRS did in 2 pages when they made the report on bison in 1964. That's the Rugby report. I've checked these on Google Earth and the estates are there with pitched roofs. So I think they were just patched up as councillors seized on the NBA comment that the structures had absorbed all the loads put upon them since they were built. Of course they had, otherwise they would have fallen down. Although the NBA should have added that did not make them safe, as the luckless drivers who bought tickets to go across the Morandi Bridge realised as the roadway linking France and Italy fell away underneath them. Now we're going to watch a short film, boys and girls, that my dad shot. I've written some other stuff. Maybe I should read it first. Yeah, this film. It's a 6-minute standard 8 footage filmed by my late father, Harry Brack, around 1964 and put together by my dear brother, Ben Brack, last week in October 2024. It shows a slum clearance development area in Tower Hamlets, boarded up derelict properties earmarked for demolition to be seen in the background. Examples of bricked up terraced houses and the type of architecture which was demolished to make way for the industrialised LPS towers, which can be seen in varying stages of construction and completion, including low-rise carcasses before their brick facades have been added. A day of civic pride where local dignitaries and council members were invited to view a block going up from a rooftop opposite. A comment made by Sam Zell's daughter, Rachel, when he took her to see Ronan Point in the 1980s as a child was, "But Daddy, where do all the children play?" LPS was an experiment that went wrong, but which has never fully been accounted for by any central government, whilst the public have continued to pay through their council tax and their communities a very high price indeed. Right. The audit is good news. Checking blocks over 18 metre cannot happen soon enough. There should be a phase 2 audit scheduled for all LPS under 18 metres, however, with any low rise already associated with accompanying blocks like Broadwater Farm and Packington should be checked at the same time as their accompanying towers. I mean, if you're going to look into these blocks, you might as well, do it properly. From a fire safety point of view, the inherent design defects mean all LPS structures built during the period should be assumed to have compartmentation issues. This is a given. Leaseholders. Walbrook, Edmonton, Enfield Council are offering half the market value for a non-defective equivalent flat. So leaseholders holding a virtual gun to their heads, saying they would need to be charged £235,000 per flat to carry out a 30 million refurbishment to make the blocks safe. They were missold the dream of right to buy and ended up with negative equity and unable to afford anything in the same area. If this situation was applied to residents of the Barbican, for instance, do you think they would settle for it? No, they would demand and they would get like for like, or the financial equivalent. If LPS had been any good, the private sector would have picked it up. They did not. Right, I think that's it. It's time for the film. Thanks so much. I'm sorry you've heard a lot of my voice, and I would like to provide all the written information if anyone would like it later on. Okay, so I think this is going to work. Let's see if we can get this film. There we go. I apologise for the quality, but it's standard 8. This is before Super 8, Okay, here we go. Starts in Tower Hamlets. You can see the panels going up here. The demolition area. These sort of streets were demolished to make way for these blocks. Look, all bricked up. They'd be worth over £1 million each now. These are the carcasses before the brick facades. These are the large panels behind the brickwork. And that's it.
Cool. Thank you very much, Hannah. That was great.
Sorry, it was me droning on quite a lot, but I think it's quite important that we're at this point that I'm not the only one that's got this information, because to me, Sam Webb and my dad, they were like the elders of the tribe. You know, they were really, really skilled, intelligent, independent professionals in the field, you know, and I'm just tasked with having the knowledge now, you know, because they're both doing this.
It was great. I know I found it really interesting and really helpful, and it still scares the life out of me as well as a structural engineer. Guys, if you want cameras on, mics up, throw your hand up, questions. I've got my head spinning after all that as well. And for the engineers on the call, 1.4 pounds per square inch is equivalent to 9.7 kilonewtons per square meter. The 5 pounds per square inch is the 34 kilonewtons that we designed for today. So even in old BRE publications, old LPS guidance documents, everything like that, they always say half the 34, which brings you down to what, 17. And if these panels can't take even 10, then how does that fare in terms of fire exposure and the rest as well? In my head, I've got what is safe ringing through my head at the minute, because we're back to where we were 50 years ago, when they were reappraising these blocks. And at the minute, I'm also trying to figure out the process, because I've got clients who have these blocks, and I've said no to, well, kind of been wary of them all so far. And I know that if I write a report, it could well land up on your desk as well, Hannah, and you'll be back here again in a few years tearing me a new one. So for me, it's kind of like the first step is a regulatory check in terms of, okay, when was it built? Should it have been strengthened? Do that, and that's almost like a desktop study. And you can say, yes, it should have been done, but like you pointed out in the Zinn consultants, people should have done a lot of things on these things that hasn't happened. And so you're almost led into investigation and testing, which is very much hit and miss. It seems to be more miss than hit at the minute. And even if we recommend, we go in, we do investigation work, it whole needs strengthening, it needs everything else. With all the other defects added on top of these buildings, where are we drawing the line on safety? What is safe in terms of, okay, we might be able to strengthen these buildings to stop the panels moving out if it was a gas explosion or pressure, an internal pressure. But then what about the condition of the building? They've already got poor compartmentalization. They've already got poor corrosion resistance. They've already got leaks, water ponding, construction defects. How does that fit into what is safe? The question, this whole building safety thing for me has always been bringing it back into asset management and maintenance and drawing the line on safety and trying to find out what is safe, what's acceptable. And I don't think, especially like when asking the question now, the difference between us and 50 years ago is that they were new build. They were relatively in good condition, even though they were manufactured poorly. Whereas they've stood the test of time for 50 years now. They've been beaten, broken, amended all over the time. At what point does the condition of the building come in? Are we looking at end of life building now? Should we be phasing buildings out? Where do we go from here? How do we make the judgment? All these questions striking through our head at the minute. And it's when we had the chat on before this that led to me invite you along and just putting this out to the wider audience. It was the pressure one, because we've got to now consider fire as an action on the structures in relation to these blocks. So if these things are a lot weaker than what we think they are, and I just know the amount of work involved going ahead in one, just trying to justify, see if this work has been done, if it hasn't been done, strengthening effects, how long do we keep these for, how long can they stand for, or is it a case of, or do we take this opportunity now to start phasing these out and start putting safer buildings up instead of them? I'm not envious of any engineer or any checking engineer at the minute trying to make these judgments on these buildings. I think it's rabbit holes right now. Ruth, crack on.
Hi Hannah, that was great, thank you. I have a bit of a concern that the powers that be don't actually have a definitive list. I'm not sure who I mean by the powers that be.
No, I had several meetings with Sam and the local government association, and we've given them the list, and they passed it on to the government at the time. I think it was the Boris Johnson government, who said they were going to form an expert panel task force to deal with it all. At first they said they didn't want the list because they said same old story, they can pull it in from the local authorities, and then they've admitted that they had taken the list on board, and so they have got a pretty good idea of where these blocks are. It's just it's not official, you know. And I mean, I've struggled on with this. I've gone through I've been through individually 3,000 blocks on Google Earth, one to see if they're still there, because if they're demolished you can just see a nice flat bit of land. Yeah. But also just to see if I can see it for my own self, if you can still see any of the large panels. A lot of them have had cladding, but on Google Earth you can go back photos from 2012 and stuff like that, so you can get it, but it's a very, very laborious task, and I need help, you know, with it. And I've kind of not been able to do anything. I haven't been able to update the Excel for the last couple of years, because in that time I've relocated from Holland, I've got a new full-time job, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Sam has sadly passed away, you know. So I think it's time that the government actually, or the local government association, works more coherently with the government and the local authorities to actually pull the information in. But more than that, to assist them with the identification of what they've got, because even the AMA said in 1983 that was the biggest problem, is we don't know what we've got and we don't know what the problems are, you know. And then you get into the realms of local authorities that they previously have not wanted to admit their large panel systems because they don't want to take the gas out, so they redefine them. You know, that needs to be addressed, and they need to be able to be directed to the original classifications that the BRE did. I think, you know, that's a good starting point. But yeah, the list, I mean, I'm happy to share this list with the caveat of that everything needs to be confirmed. I can show you it now, but I'd rather not do it on a recording
Yeah.
of the privacy and safety of the residents. And obviously, I think also they need to be told first if there's problems. But I think there needs to be a
that's a good
10-year
point.
plan. I mean, you know, get rid of the worst ones now, you know, but then, you know, where are you going to put everybody? Who's going to pay for it? Even in 10 years, does that mean we've got to sort of live on the edge of our seats with sleepless nights for 10 years? You know, I mean, it's a very difficult problem. But yeah, you're right. Sorry.
Alistair?
Sure. Thank you very much, Hannah. That was really, really interesting. I'm from Cross, but I've been around for a very, very long time. So I've followed a lot of the history of this over the years and can confirm the difficulty in getting together a list and in getting the government to get a list together. I mean, this has been an ongoing issue for a long time. So anything you've done in that regard is to be welcomed. That's great. You mentioned Surfside. The Surfside investigation is going to be published, and that was the 12-story block in Florida, which collapsed totally with around 100 people killed. That investigation is going to be published in next year, but that was an in situ block, which is different. There are still issues concerned with it being old and designed to codes which nowadays we wouldn't regard as good, and being next to a difficult environment and so forth, but it's not quite the same thing. But can I share a screen? Is that possible?
Yeah, crack on. You should have rights. If not, hang on.
All right. I'm not sure if you can see anything. I seem to have.
Yeah, we can see it. It's all good.
More than I can. Can you see collapse of large panel system across report?
Yep.
Right. This is another one. This was what we published in 2010. And if we flick through the report, you can get to it from the Cross website. There are some pictures. And this was an LPS building which was going to be demolished, and in about 29. And the demolition contractor was warned that it might be vulnerable and might be difficult. Anyway, they nudged the top story of this block with a high reach machine and replicated the Ronan Point collapse. So the whole corner came down. And you can see here a close-up of one of the joints between the floor and wall panels. And you can see a few bits of reinforcing hanging out, but nothing in the way of a substantial connection. And there's another picture of the whole thing. This just demonstrates the vulnerability to an accidental impact of a particular type. And we don't know whether that was representative or not. But there are more details if you look up that report. So thanks very much.
Anybody else? Any questions? No. Alistair, just a quick one. You would have been involved on the Cross report back in '85, guessing maybe?
The which report?
The Cross report that Hannah mentioned in the presentation.
Yeah.
The one thing, because I remember speaking to the BRE when probably a couple of years ago, once the Building Safety Act kicked in, and they were saying that they don't do large panel system appraisals anymore because they've lost all their expertise. And I think we're finding this in the industry at the minute. It's almost like a new learning curve because that information hasn't been passed down, and so we're all almost back at square one in terms of asking all the same questions that we're doing, and we're trying to piece together. And yeah, this scares the life out of me. This LPS blocks, mostly because I think it has implications throughout the rest of the industry. So even if we can go in there, we strengthen, we stop these panels blasting out. Like Hannah mentioned in the two correspondence from the AMA and Mr. Sam Webb as well, like that doesn't make the building safe. So what is safe? Like, I know they don't have any alternate low paths. It's stiff enough just to do the job almost, but I think this is a massive question that the industry hasn't answered yet. And I think the industry needs to come out and almost lead the way on this a bit better. but I don't think anybody's going to make a decision. And I know I have LPS clients at the minute in terms of, because the restrictions on, if you remove gas from the building, it leaves a shortfall in supply, and so they're basically faced with a new substation coming in order to meet the demand imposed on the electrical system coming in. The electrical system might not even take it as well, so they're facing fees in terms of removing the gas, fees in terms of remediating the buildings, and then it's a case of, okay, how long are they going to spread that over? Some authorities have money to do it, some don't. And then, like you said, Hannah, the question of, okay, where do all the residents go? How do we manage this during this time? They all have lives, livelihoods, family in the area. I mean, even if they can remove everybody, demolish and rebuild, that's still going to take minimum 5-6 years, I guess, in order to demolish something properly, get the designs done and rebuild again. And so I think it brings it back into asset management, safety. One, what is safe, and two, how are we supposed to be managing these buildings when they're at the end of the life now and they're in this poor condition? I think it needs to be very carefully approached, I think, at the minute. But Hannah, that was great. I love the presentation. It's given me, I've made another page full of notes of documents that I need to read and go into and dig through.
I have a question. Yeah, hi Hannah. Thank you for presentation. May I ask you just bit of in a topic, but like a little of like, because like I couple of months ago, like several months ago, I downloaded something like even Bison list of building, but like they are not stating the addresses, only just like where the cities are. And you say you will share the list, right? So like with us.
Well, the thing is, I'm happy to share the list, but it's a bit depends on what it's for, really, because it needs to be controlled, because you've got people living there, you know. And Sam used to say, never publish the list, never make it accessible en masse, because there's different threats. In the 70s, it used to be that people, you know, the IRA might be building a bomb in one of them, you know, or it could be a terrorist targeted threat, or, you know, that if you have all this information in one place and it sort of falls into the wrong hands, or, you know, or unscrupulous developers might start targeting to these blocks, you know, without a plan in place, it makes it difficult. And the priority is to, you know, the safety of the residents, really.
Yeah.
So they should be included and informed before it's spread out. But obviously, I need to share this information again with local government, with the central government, with whoever wants it. But on a sort of need to know. I mean, I don't know what the criteria is, but you know, maybe it's something Sean could control. You know.
Yeah.
But how are you wanting to use the information?
Kat,
Sorry?
How do you want to use the information?
I mean, because like when I was reading just like the Styler book and everything about the system and all the reports on it, but they said like another document say like there are some companies, because they didn't specify just like the list based on where is LPS, but list who built it based on the company who built it.
That's where we can find out. If you know who built it, it's much easier to find out whether it's LPS or not, because that's what we have. That's the information that I've showed you today. There are lists of that kind of thing from 1960s, you know.
Yeah.
I'm happy to share all that. That's not a problem.
I was just thinking mostly like if we know the region, like let's say maybe the best way will be for a future, like you will control it, and then like people can give you address.
Yeah, like that.
Something like address and postcode, and like you can then debate with the person just like who is there, and maybe just like somehow control it, like, or we can find a way. Definitely we won't share it, and definitely it's just like I understand.
My problem is that I'm kind of done with this now. It's like I've got a life. I was crying this morning trying to read the script. I had to put my makeup back on because it's so personal to me. I've grown up with this whole thing. You know, my dad used to rage around the house, you know, shouting and screaming about it. And, you know, my mum would be, calm down, Harry, because he'd be like, they can't put gas in there. Don't they understand? You know, and it was a real background of my life. And now that Sam has passed away, I can't really deal with it all like providing information individually. But how I've worked in the past is that the Tower Blocks UK is a information sharing hub. When they've had requests from residents, I will give them all the information that they need. So if someone says, I'm living at this block and we want to know, I'm a leaseholder or I'm a tenant, we want to know, is it a large panel system block? I will give them individually, block to block basis, all the information that I can find, But if it's I don't know. I mean, it's a very difficult one. But yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to provide all I've actually retyped everything I've shown you. I've got on sort of readable Excel sheets with the contractors, the systems they use, the pre-systems that they pre-things. I mean, the thing about the systems, there was a huge number of them. And something the AMA said, which we covered, was that no one system performed better than the other. So if you look at, Bison, and you look at, there is quite a lot of reports, and there was investigations done. You can actually apply that to the other blocks, and I've got all the joints that are similar. So the Larsen Nielsen was an H2 joint. All the other joints for the other systems I've got. And I'm really happy to pass all that information on. So, but I don't want to control it centrally. I want to paint pictures and go to my allotment,
That was my another question, because like digging through the details and everything in UK, it's different than in other countries, but like UK seems like using the same type of the joints across everything. But I was just like wondering, have you ever come across just like big differences between the details? And if you can share those details with us, like at least we will know what to expect.
Show you. I've got them. I can hold them up. I've got them over there, on one of the things that Sam sent me from the original investigation that the BRE did in 1968 for the inquiry. I've got those. But the thing is that the joints are slightly different, but they all involve some form of dry pack that was, was not put right. I mean, I don't know if you know, but when they did the forensic demolition of Ronan Point, when they actually excavated the joints, they found sweepings, they found cigarette packets, they found copies of the News of the World, or whatever it was. Well, if you're a navvy on a building site working on, you're already up to the 15th floor and you're on an open site and someone says, right, kettle's on, we're going, do a sweep up. You just sweep it up. It's a building site. You chuck it over the edge of the bit of panel on the floor that's there and you go home because you're on time work, So, I mean, the thing is the joints individually for individual systems may vary in their the elements that form them, but the defects in them is shared.
Yeah, it's just like we have to establish just like how to do it. I have like few things in my head, just like, but it's also like I have I think 2 more questions quickly. Did you come across with a bigger report, or even Alistair or anybody, where they will be describing these differential movements, more like the results of testing on site, or what was happening, or just if there was, what was the range of the differential movement, and if it was like only thermal, or it was just like something from what happened during this wrongly cast connection and everything. So was there any report? Does anybody have any idea?
Not specifically about the differential movement, but there was differential movement. It's mentioned, that's part of the problem with the whole thing. But I mean, you also have to remember that the nibs, some of these things, they had slabs with a little concrete nib, was sort of tiny, like, half a centimetre or a centimetre, so the amount of give, there's not much to play with, and on a very windy day, and now, climate change, whatever, I don't know, the wind speeds have picked up a lot. We get gale force winds, especially up in Aberdeen or somewhere. And there's a bending moment that happens when the wind at the top, it's a bending moment. And if you've got a void, say you've got panels connected with voids in them, where there should be dry pack and the nuts loosened off and it becomes a monolithic structure, it's okay. But if you've got voids in those joints, what happens is the joint becomes what's called an elastic hinge. So it's actually swaying in the wind with that void there, making it put stresses and pressures on already stressed out joints, or lifting bolts,
Yeah.
So I think I haven't specifically come across a differential movement report though. So.
Alistair?
Yeah, thanks. I don't know if there's anybody from Building Safety Regulator on the call, but if not, they are tasked with assembling all the information that they can get as part of the assessment process. So if you wanted to make contact with them, you could either do it by asking me. I could provide a conduit, or I could provide it to Sean if that was necessary. But I think they are a central body, and following the introduction of the Building Safety Regulator, there's more chance of them getting something done than there has been in the rather disconnected past. So that might be an avenue, and I'm certain that if you chose to share information, they would be extremely grateful, and on behalf of the public.
Thanks,
as much as I'd love to see the list and I'd be all over it, I'd find it really interesting. I couldn't do anything with it, really. I think almost Ruth, you want to be asking Ruth, I'd suggest asks the BSR as well. Ruth, you just got your hand up.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I slightly lost concentration when Alistair started. I think the BSR is the right place for the list, because I'm looking at all the safety case reports for buildings, and there's been a few buildings that have cropped up where the local authority is still unsure whether their building is an LPS building. And it is the review of the safety case reports for the higher risk buildings. So it's the opportunity to finally tease all of this out. But yeah, there's still some conflicting information out there. I can't remember which local authority it was, actually, and I probably wouldn't say if I could remember. But they had some advice about 5 years ago saying that a particular building might be LPS. And then they had another structural engineers report saying they didn't think it was, but it needed some more checks. So to me, it's not concluded. So it has sent a bit of anxiety in some of the BSR people. And yeah, I just feel that that's where the list could potentially be. I don't know what you think about that, Alistair.
Well, yes. Indeed, Ruth, there's a great deal of confusion and there is no definitive list. So any information given to the Building Safety Regulator, I think, would be the right place to deposit it. Talking to the local authorities individually is a very scattergun approach, isn't it?
I think that's a great idea. I mean, I'm really happy to get together with you, Ruth, in person, and to email you all the stuff that I've got. It might be very good if you have a central list, I mean, with its, limitations, so that when people come to you with blocks, when local authority comes to you with blocks, you have something to compare it against.
Yeah, so I don't actually work, when I say I work for the Building Safety Regulator, I work as part of a framework for them. So I'm not the Building Safety Regulator, but yeah. But equally, there's a danger that it goes to the wrong person. It needs to go to someone quite senior in the Building Safety Regulator who then does the right thing with it, if you see what I mean. Yeah.
Ask questions, Alistair and Ruth, if you can both just ask questions your end, and we'll try to find the right person between us and make sure the information gets where it should be. Because I think, even like you've both said, if you've got a list that you're comparing against where you're not too sure if it's an LPS block or not, but you're like, actually, we've got an idea. Hannah's list has said, yeah, pretty sure this is it. Can you do more investigation and testing? It's at least it's a way to push back, another way to remove the ambiguity for it.
See, I'm very happy going forward to get inquiries from you guys, but I don't want to be sort of local authorities contacting me. Do you know what I mean? If you channel it, we can always try and verify any block, of all the blocks that I've got. I'm very happy to work like that going forward. I mean, I'm not just going to drop this, but, I don't want to be actively the one, the go-to person, I mean, this wouldn't be right. I'm not in the industry, so.
Can I ask one more question? Was there anything about the effects of sprinklers and LPS blocks ever done?
Well, that's a tricky one. I mean, I'm a great proponent, or I back sprinklers. I think they're wonderful. Grenfell, it bears that out. But there is something that was discussed with Sam and the all-party parliamentary group Fire Safety and Rescue with Ronnie King, who's the chief fire, big chief Ronnie. Ronnie is pushed for sprinklers a lot, and I know there was a discussion with them about some of these blocks might not be able to handle it if the weight of the water, you know, penetrating the block, you know, that could then create another problem. So, but I haven't seen anything official on it anyway.
No, I know Joe, who couldn't make today, he's a fire engineer that I work with quite closely, just learning stuff together basically, and that was one of his questions as to the weight of the sprinkler system on the block, the effects of it has once the water is discharged. If these blocks do struggle from compartmentation issues, then does all the water just trickle down? Does it go through?
Yeah,
How does it affect the connections?
For sure it does. I mean, I've sat in people's flats when it's raining and the water's just pouring in, and they've said, oh, it's coming from the guy's goldfish tank upstairs, and it's like, no. Oh, it might be the bath, and it's like, no, it's coming in from the rain, coming in from outside in. So if that's happening, you know, if you've got sprinklers going off on the 18th floor, they're sure going to reach down, you know. I don't know.
And if you're adding all new water back into an already corroded joint or panel, then does that trigger another condition survey? Is it a case of that you need to strip back everything again and have a look at the building and see how it's performed, even if it was
It's a very, very difficult thing because these blocks are inhabited, you see. So I think, you know, there's a minimum standard BRE to excavate joints in at least 5 flats per block. Well, that's not a reality because people are living there, you know, so they usually do 1 flat when it becomes vacant, you know, so there's problems.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we've gone through all, we're having the same problems at the minute as well. Callum, did you want to ask a question, or are you just got your camera on? Okay, cool.
Yeah, just had my camera on. Thank you, Hannah, for the very insightful talk. And I'll email you separately with just some clarification questions that I don't think would be appropriate here, but yeah.
Great, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you for the invite.
No problem. I haven't got anything else unless anybody else has. No. Hannah, I will share Alistair's and Ruth's. You already got Ruth's email anyway, but I'll share Alistair. I'll make that point of contact after this as well. And thank you again so much for the presentation. We loved it. It was great. And thoroughly scared the hell out of me again. And I will be treading carefully going forward on this as well. But much appreciated. Loved it. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very honoured, you know. I feel valuable time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was great.
Thank you.
Good
Yeah,
luck.
thank you, Hannah.
Stay in touch.
Bye all.